What if I told you that your depression isn't just a chemical imbalance, but a spiritual crisis? That the weight you carry every day, the numbness, the lack of motivation, the sense that life has lost its color, isn't a malfunction, but a message from the deepest part of you, your soul. In a world that idolizes speed, performance, and surface-level perfection, we've lost something ancient, something sacred. We've built lives around schedules and screens, but forgotten how to live from the inside out. Depression, in this light, becomes more than a clinical label. It becomes a doorway, a dark but sacred invitation to turn inward. Carl Jung didn't see depression as something to eliminate. He saw it as a summons, to call from the unconscious that something vital has gone missing. In his view, the soul is not a concept reserved for religion or poetry. It is a living, breathing part of who we are. And when we abandon it, it fights back. Not with screams, but with silence. Not with chaos, but with stillness that feels like death. In this video, we'll walk through the 10 stages of this spiritual disconnection, from the masks we wear to the parts of ourselves we've abandoned. From the cultural noise that drowns out our inner voice, to the hidden meaning behind your darkest feelings, we'll explore how your dreams speak a forgotten language and why the path to healing isn't in fixing yourself, but in remembering yourself. So if you've ever felt empty, hopeless, or like you're just going through the motions, this video isn't here to shame you or fix you. It's here to guide you back to you. It's an unsettling truth, but one that more people are admitting in whispers behind closed doors. I feel nothing. This isn't just sadness, it's not grief or even stress. It's a hollow grey, fog that settles in the chest and lingers for days, months, sometimes years. It's a flatline of the spirit, a quiet death of meaning, and yet outwardly these people appear fine. They go to work, post photos, attend social events and laugh on cue, but inside they're disconnected, not just from others, but from themselves. This state of numbness is becoming so common, it's almost invisible, camouflaged by productivity, masked by small talk, medicated with dopamine hits from social media or shopping. The world, in its relentless forward motion, doesn't pause to ask why people are so empty. It only tells them to keep going. But beneath the surface, the soul is quietly starving. Not for more things, but for something real. Modern culture is not designed for inner life. It thrives on stimulation, distraction, and external validation. In fact, our entire social structure is a machine that rewards those who suppress their emotions and punish those who dare to ask deeper questions. We learn early on that to survive in this world, we must abandon parts of ourselves, our curiosity, our sensitivity, our wonder. We trade them for efficiency, ambition, and social approval. But this trade comes at a devastating cost. Over time, we lose our ability to feel deeply. We forget how to be present. We forget how to connect with our inner world. And so we drift. Not because we are broken, but because we are malnourished, spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. The epidemic of numbness isn't a failure of individuals. It's the symptom of a culture that has forgotten the soul exists, let alone how to care for it. You see it in people's eyes, the deadness, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep cures, the vacant smiles and polite conversations that hide oceans of unspoken pain. And maybe you've felt it too, that quiet dread when you wake up and realize you're just repeating another day without purpose or direction. This is not weakness. This is what happens when we are forced to live out of alignment with who we really are. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that our suffering often stems not from external circumstances, but from a life unlived, from ignoring the voice of the soul in favor of conformity. When your inner truth is buried under layers of expectation and performance, your spirit begins to dim. And what's left is a life that looks successful on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. That hollowness is not your enemy. It is your signal, a message that something vital has gone missing. The great irony is that many people experiencing this numbness think they're alone in it. But look closer and you'll see this emptiness is everywhere. It's in the silent anxiety of the corporate professional who questions the meaning of his life but can't say it aloud. It's in the eyes of the mother who loves her children but secretly wonders what happened to her dreams. It's in the heart of the teenager who's bombarded with images of perfect lives and feels like a ghost inside his own body. What we're dealing with is not just an epidemic of mental health, it's an epidemic of meaninglessness, a spiritual disconnection that no pill, app, or productivity hack can fix. The answer isn't to escape the feeling, it's to listen to it, to follow it like a breadcrumb trail back to what matters. Because at the root of our depression, our burnout, and our emotional deadness is a soul that's been neglected and is quietly begging us to come home. Carl Jung didn't speak of the soul as a vague or mystical concept. For him, the soul was the deep, mysterious center of the human being, the part of us that longs, aches, dreams, and remembers. It's not just our feelings or beliefs, it's the truth underneath them. In Jung's view, the soul is not a religious fantasy. It is a psychological reality. He believed that most neuroses, the anxieties, compulsions, and depressions that haunt modern life, stem from a disconnection from this inner source. He once wrote, "The soul suffers greatly when forced to lead a secondary life." That's precisely what most people are doing today. We live in our heads, strategizing, calculating, overanalyzing, but our hearts are silent and our inner lives are parched. Modernity praises logic and shuns mystery. It rewards performance and punishes introspection. In this world, the soul becomes an inconvenience, a whisper we drown in noise. The persona is one of Carl Jung's most powerful and unsettling ideas. It's not just a social role, it's the mask you wear to survive. The part of you shaped by expectation, adaptation, and performance. We all have one. In fact, we need one. Without a persona, we couldn't navigate society. We'd be raw, exposed, and vulnerable. The danger isn't that we have a mask. The danger is that we forget we're wearing one. The persona begins as a tool, but over time, it becomes a prison. Jung saw the soul as the mediator between the ego and the unconscious. It is the bridge that connects the self we think we are to the deeper, hidden parts of us, our wounds, instincts, desires, dreams, and symbolic truths. But most people, conditioned by a culture obsessed with surfaces, never cross that bridge. We are trained to pursue goals, status, and validation from others, all while ignoring the most important relationship we'll ever have, the one with our inner self. The tragedy is that many people don't even know what they've lost. They mistake their chronic emptiness for laziness or their anxiety for a flaw in their biology. Rarely do they ask, what if this isn't about what's wrong with me? What if it's about what I've lost touch with? Jung's work offers us a powerful framework to make sense of that loss and to find our way back to something real, something ancient, something alive. In our mechanized, digitized world, the soul has been exiled. We reduce people to data points, emotions to disorders, and meaning to productivity. The soul doesn't fit into this system. It can't be measured or monetized. So it gets ignored. But the cost is enormous. When we forget the soul, we forget what it means to be fully human. We lose our connection to beauty, to mystery, to suffering, and to purpose. Jung's writings remind us that the soul speaks in symbols, not slogans. It speaks in dreams, images, and synchronicities, in subtle invitations rather than loud commands. But in a culture that demands constant clarity and certainty, we learn to dismiss anything that doesn't come with a clear explanation. And so we silence the very voice that could lead us home. Jung's entire psychological system was an effort to restore that voice, to bring the soul back into dialogue with our daily lives. What Jung gave us is not a map, but a compass. He didn't offer simple answers. He offered direction, inward, toward the self, toward the places we've avoided and the truths we've buried. He saw therapy not as a fix, but as a sacred journey, one where the goal is not perfection but integration, and at the center of that integration is the soul, the part of us that is timeless, symbolic, intuitive, and alive, the part that knows things we've forgotten and longs for things we've denied. Reconnecting with the soul isn't easy. It means unlearning much of what modern life has taught us. It means slowing down, feeling more, listening more deeply. But the rewards are profound, because when you reclaim your soul, you reclaim your aliveness. You begin to remember who you are, not who you were told to be, but who you were before the world interrupted. And that remembering is the first step out of the numbness and into something sacred. You start off learning how to be liked, how to behave, how to be appropriate. But somewhere along the line, you lose touch with the parts of you that don't fit the mold. You tuck them away, your rage, your sadness, your weirdness, your longing. You replace them with charm, politeness, productivity, and the more people applaud the mask, the more ashamed you feel of what lies beneath it. The persona thrives on external validation. It feeds on applause, approval, and acceptance, but the soul doesn't care about performance. It doesn't care how many followers you have, how productive your week was, or how nice you appeared at that party. The soul craves authenticity, and it suffers in silence when you deny it. Jung warned that when we identify too strongly with our persona, we begin to confuse it with our actual self. We become hollow actors, moving through life with rehearsed smiles and curated emotions. And while the world may reward us for being agreeable, it punishes us internally. The cost of maintaining the mask is the loss of our own depth. We become strangers to ourselves, alienated not by some grand catastrophe, but by a slow, quiet betrayal of who we really are. This disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It's death by 1,000 small compromises. You avoid conflict to keep the peace. You pretend you're fine when you're breaking inside. You say yes when your whole being screams no. And each time, the gap between your persona and your soul widens. You become a performance, not a person. The tragedy is, many people will never even realize this has happened because the persona is seductive. It brings short-term safety. It keeps relationships stable. It makes you liked. But over time, it also makes you feel empty, exhausted, and invisible. You wake up one day and wonder, why don't I feel real anymore? Why does everything feel muted, like I'm watching life through glass? The answer is often this: you've mistaken your persona for yourself, and your soul is somewhere deep inside, waiting to be remembered. Jung believed that true healing begins when we separate who we really are from who we've been pretending to be. That doesn't mean destroying the persona. It means becoming conscious of it. It means asking uncomfortable questions. Am I being honest, or am I performing? Do I feel seen, or just approved of? These are soul questions, and they demand courage, because shedding the mask means risking rejection. It means becoming visible in ways that might scare people and yourself. But there's something sacred in that risk, because each time you remove a layer of the persona, you reclaim a piece of your essence. You begin to feel again, to long again, to create, to rage, to love without a script. And that is the beginning of soul recovery. You stop living for applause and start living for truth. You stop wearing the world's expectations like armor and start walking the path back to your real self. Before we ever wore a persona, before we even knew how to pretend, we were whole, not perfect, whole. Children arrive in the world as unfiltered expressions of soul. We cry when we're hurt, laugh when we're joyful, and scream when we're angry. We dance without shame, ask without apology, and speak truth with raw honesty. But somewhere along the line, that authenticity gets fractured. It happens quietly. A parent tells us not to be too much. A teacher rolls their eyes when we speak. A friend mocks our curiosity. We get the message, parts of us are unacceptable, so we begin to hide. We learn which emotions are rewarded and which ones invite punishment. In doing so, we start to cut away pieces of our true self. The wound begins here, not from violence, but from subtle emotional abandonment. And that first cut is what creates the divide between us and our soul. The wounded inner child doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. You grow up, get a job, maybe build a life that looks stable on the outside. But inside, the child still waits, frozen in time, clutching unmet needs and unprocessed pain. It's the part of you that still fears abandonment, still craves unconditional love, still aches to be seen. But the adult self, shaped by the persona, often denies this part. It says, grow up, be strong, stop being so sensitive. And so, the inner child stays buried, unheard and unseen. But the soul is not fooled. It remembers. It knows that healing can't happen without turning back, without acknowledging the pain that first taught us to disconnect. Jung believed that the child archetype holds the key to renewal, not as a return to innocence, but as a reconnection with the part of us that was once alive, whole and true, before the world taught us to hide. This is why so many adults feel inexplicably broken despite outward success. The soul doesn't care about resumes, wealth, or reputation. It aches for reconnection with the forgotten child. That ache often shows up as depression, anxiety, chronic emptiness. We mistake it for weakness or chemical imbalance, but often it's a signal from deep within. You left a part of yourself behind, and not just any part, the original spark, the voice of the soul. Healing this fracture requires more than therapy or self-help quotes. It demands inner witnessing, going back to those moments of first pain and staying present with what you abandoned. Letting that child speak, letting it cry, letting it rage, letting it exist, not to wallow in the past, but to retrieve the vitality locked there. Because without reclaiming the child, the adult self remains a half-truth, a structure built on denial, not depth. Reconnecting with the inner child is not about becoming childish, it's about becoming honest. It's about dropping the act, the role, the performance, and turning inward with tenderness. It's about listening to what was silenced and welcoming it back into your being. When you do this, the divide between your soul and your surface self begins to close. You cry differently, you laugh differently, you see life not as a series of obligations, but as an unfolding story, one in which you are finally present. This is soul work in its rawest form, and it's terrifying because it often means grieving what you never got. But in that grief is resurrection, not of the person you were told to be, but of the person you've always been. And that person, raw, feeling, whole, is the soul finally remembered. That is the beginning of real aliveness. In a world that moves faster than the human heart was ever meant to beat, distraction has become the norm. We wake up and reach for our phones before our feet touch the floor. Emails, messages, notifications, we consume them before we even breathe consciously. Every moment of silence is quickly filled. A podcast while we shower, music during breakfast, TikToks in the bathroom, background TV while we work. But this isn't just about busyness, it's about spiritual sedation. The pace and noise of modern life aren't accidental. They serve a function. They keep us from hearing what hurts, because in silence, the soul speaks. And most of us are terrified of what it might say. The inner child, the repressed emotions, the abandoned dreams, all of it starts to stir when things get quiet. So we run, scroll, binge, repeat. We call it productivity, but it's avoidance wrapped in efficiency. Jung understood that the modern individual was becoming alienated not only from society, but from the self. The more the world sped up, the further we drifted from depth. We replaced meaning with measurement. How many likes, how many followers, how many hours worked, how much money made. These numbers became our new gods, and in worshipping them, we lost touch with the invisible realities, the soul, the intuition, the symbolic life. Distraction is not just digital, it's existential. We're distracted by ambition, by social roles, by constant comparison. And all of it pulls us further from the stillness where real transformation happens. The soul doesn't shout over noise, it whispers beneath it. But we've trained ourselves to fear boredom, to fear not knowing, to fear stillness, because stillness confronts us with ourselves, and for many that's the most uncomfortable encounter of all. The consequence of this cultural frenzy is spiritual anesthesia. We are alive, but not fully living. We laugh without joy, eat without tasting, touch without intimacy. Even our rest is restless, anxious sleep, half-hearted vacations, self-care routines turned into performance. We don't know how to be anymore, we only know how to do. This disconnect has real costs. Depression rises, anxiety spreads, attention spans shrink. But beneath these symptoms is a deeper malaise. We've forgotten the rhythm of the soul. The soul moves slowly. It requires slowness to bloom, reflection to speak, solitude to heal. Our culture doesn't allow for that. It pathologizes slowness and romanticizes overdrive. But in doing so, it robs us of the very conditions in which wholeness can emerge. Jung called it the loss of soul, a kind of psychological exile we've mistaken for progress. To reclaim your soul, you must rebel against distraction. You must reclaim silence, not as absence, but as sacred space. It's in that silence that your pain has a voice, your dreams reawaken, and your essence returns. Turn off the noise. Watch how uncomfortable you become. That discomfort, it's the soul stretching, waking, re-entering. Watch how the old memories resurface, the buried truths return. That's not a malfunction, it's healing. In a culture that numbs, to feel deeply is an act of revolution. To slow down is to become dangerous to the machine that profits from your disconnection. And that's exactly what your soul wants. For you to remember that you are not a cog, not a product, not a profile. You are a living mystery, aching to be whole again. But to remember that, you must be willing to get quiet and stay there long enough for the soul to answer. Depression is one of the most misunderstood phenomena of modern psychology. It's often labeled as a chemical imbalance or reduced to faulty brain wiring, something to be medicated, managed, or numbed. But what if depression isn't a malfunction, but a message? What if it's not a disorder, but a spiritual protest? Jung didn't view depression as something merely to be fixed. He saw it as a descent into the underworld of the psyche, where something essential had been lost. Depression, in this light, becomes a dark but sacred invitation to confront what we've ignored. It says, stop, something is wrong, you're not living in alignment with your truth. And yet our culture doesn't know how to hold that kind of darkness. We pathologize it, suppress it, medicate it, and move on, never listening, never asking what it's trying to show us. At its core, depression is the soul's way of withdrawing energy from a life that no longer reflects who you are. You lose motivation not because you're broken, but because your inner compass has been silenced. You no longer care about the things you once did, not because you're lazy, but because those things never truly fed your soul to begin with. Depression can be the soul's rebellion against the false self, the persona you've worn for too long. That mask may win you approval, but it costs you authenticity, and the soul eventually demands a reckoning. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Depression can be the crucible that makes that terrifying act unavoidable. It brings the buried grief to the surface, the rage you've never voiced, the dreams you've sacrificed. It doesn't destroy you. It exposes the parts that were already starving. But to access the wisdom of depression, you have to resist the urge to escape it too quickly. This doesn't mean glorifying suffering or avoiding support. It means being curious about what the pain points toward. Ask yourself, what parts of me have I abandoned? What dreams have I betrayed? What truths have I buried to be loved, accepted, or safe? Depression often signals a profound disconnection between the life you're living and the life your soul longs for. The job you hate, the relationship that suffocates, the routines that drain you, they become unbearable not because you're defective, but because your soul is awakening. Depression then becomes the friction between the false life and the true self waiting underneath. It doesn't come to punish. It comes to realign, but only if you have the courage to sit in its darkness and let it speak. Healing from depression is not about returning to normal. Often, normal was the problem. Real healing is about descent and return. You descend into the darkness, not to stay there, but to retrieve what you left behind. Your voice, your truth, your essence. Depression can mark the beginning of individuation, the slow emergence of a life that's actually yours. But it demands depth. It demands stillness. It demands that you listen not to the noise of the world, but to the whispers of your wounded soul. Jung believed that neurosis, of which depression is often a part, emerges when we avoid the legitimate suffering that leads to transformation. So don't run from it. Let it strip away the masks. Let it crack open the numbness. Because beneath that pain is something holy, the beginning of your return, not to who the world wants you to be, but to who you really are. What if the parts of you that you're most afraid of are the very keys to your healing? That's the provocative truth behind shadow work, a cornerstone of Jung's psychology. The shadow is everything you've repressed, rejected, or disowned in order to survive in the world. It's the anger you were told was bad, the sensuality you were taught to suppress, the ambition that made others uncomfortable, the sadness you never felt safe to express. As children, we're exquisitely sensitive to what earns us love and what triggers rejection. So we amputate the parts of ourselves that don't fit the mold. We become nice instead of authentic, agreeable instead of assertive, invisible instead of radiant. The shadow holds all of this, and it doesn't disappear just because we bury it. In fact, the more we suppress it, the more it leaks out sideways, through anxiety, depression, passive aggression, addiction, self-sabotage, and broken relationships. Shadow work is not about self-improvement, it's about self-confrontation. It requires radical honesty, the kind that strips away illusions and breaks open our carefully crafted identities. To engage with your shadow is to look at the mirror, without filters, without justification, without performance. It's not comfortable, and it's not supposed to be. You'll meet parts of yourself you've judged, feared, or avoided for years. You'll realize how much of your energy has gone into maintaining the persona, and how much liberation lives on the other side of letting it go. The irony is that what you suppress the most often contains your greatest power. That repressed anger, it might hold your boundaries. That denied sensuality, it might be the source of your creativity. The shadow isn't evil, it's unloved. And only by turning toward it can you truly reclaim your full humanity. One of the most powerful aspects of shadow work is how deeply it shifts your perception of others. When you begin to recognize your own projections, when you see how you demonize others for traits you've disowned in yourself, you start to dismantle judgment and build compassion. That person you hate for being arrogant, Maybe they remind you of the confidence you're afraid to express. That friend who triggers you with their freedom. Maybe they mirror your own trapped desires. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Shadow work makes life less about blaming and more about integrating. It replaces moralism with maturity. It teaches you that healing isn't found in perfection, but in wholeness. You stop striving to be good and start becoming real. You don't fix the shadow, you befriend it. But shadow work isn't a weekend retreat or a one-time journaling session. It's a lifelong process of listening, feeling, and daring to hold what's been deemed unacceptable. It asks you to enter the basement of your psyche with curiosity, instead of fear, to sit with your shame, your envy, your desire, your sorrow, not to judge it but to understand it. And from that understanding, something miraculous happens. You begin to change, not by force, but by integration. You start to speak with a voice that's no longer edited by fear. You act from a self that's rooted in truth rather than performance. The energy that once went into hiding becomes available for creation. Shadow work doesn't make you perfect, it makes you whole. And that wholeness, that unapologetic embodied authenticity, is what your soul has been craving all along. In a world obsessed with logic, productivity, and linear thinking, we've forgotten that the soul doesn't speak in spreadsheets. It speaks in symbols. Carl Jung believed that dreams are direct messages from the unconscious, coded not in words but in images, archetypes and metaphors. These aren't just random neurological firings, they're meaningful communications from the deeper layers of our psyche. When your conscious mind is asleep, the unconscious seizes its chance to speak. That recurring nightmare, that strange dream that lingers in your memory for days, they're not just noise, they are signs, they are invitations. Your soul is reaching out to you through the dream world, offering clues to what you've ignored, repressed or misunderstood. To interpret a dream is not to decode it like a puzzle, but to sit with it, feel it, enter into relationship with it. It's a dialogue, not a diagnosis. In dreams, the soul bypasses our ego defenses and goes straight to the truth. You might dream of falling, not because you're failing in life, but because you've lost your grounding. You might see a child, not to remind you of your own kids, but to show you the innocence or vulnerability you've abandoned. You might meet a stranger in a dark room, not as a warning, but as a symbol of the shadow self you've refused to face. Jung once said, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." In other words, dreams are the bridge between your conscious self and the deeper ancient intelligence that lies beneath it. The more attention you give your dreams, the more alive your inner world becomes. You start to feel guided, not just by your mind, but by something older, wilder, and wiser than reason. Symbols are the natural language of the soul because they contain layers of meaning that logic can't hold. A tree in a dream is not just a tree. It might represent life, growth, connection, ancestry, or even death. A snake isn't just a reptile. It might symbolize transformation, danger, or healing. This is the beauty of symbolic language. It doesn't define, it evokes. It moves you on an intuitive level. That's why art, poetry, mythology, and religion have always used symbols to express the inexpressible. And in the dream world, the archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the great mother, the wise old man, emerge to show you not who you are on the surface, but who you are in essence. You're not just dreaming about events, you're dreaming about your becoming. Your soul is showing you the terrain of your transformation, one image at a time. But in the modern world, we've been taught to dismiss all of this. We're told dreams are nonsense, that symbols are woo, that if it can't be measured, it doesn't matter. And so we ignore the soul's messages and then wonder why we feel so lost. We wake up anxious, disconnected and numb, Because the deepest part of us has been silenced. Reclaiming the language of the soul means making space for mystery again. It means writing down your dreams, not to analyze them like a textbook, but to explore them like sacred art. It means looking at symbols not with the question, "What does this mean?" but with the deeper inquiry, "What does this stir in me?" When you let dreams and symbols speak, something ancient in you begins to stir. You feel remembered, reunited, and that reunion is a return, not to fantasy but to the part of you that has always known who you are. After navigating the hidden language of the soul, we arrive at one of Carl Jung's most profound and misunderstood concepts: individuation. It's not about becoming someone else, it's about becoming fully yourself. Most people live fragmented lives. They're split between the roles they play, the trauma they carry, and the persona they show the world. They live from the surface, avoiding the deeper currents of who they truly are. Individuation is the opposite of that. It's the lifelong journey of reuniting the broken pieces of the psyche and becoming a whole human being. It means facing your shadow, reclaiming the inner child, integrating your dreams and symbols, and stepping into the authenticity of your soul. This is not self-improvement. It's not about optimization or productivity. It's a sacred process of remembering, reconciling, and returning. But the path of individuation isn't easy. It requires courage, a deep and quiet bravery to face the parts of yourself that are painful, forgotten, or even shameful. It often begins with a crisis, something that shakes the foundations of your identity, a loss, a depression, a moment of existential despair. And in that moment, the soul whispers, "Come home." Individuation means you stop chasing who you think you should be and begin uncovering who you already are. You realize that the answers aren't outside you. They were buried beneath layers of cultural conditioning, fear, and repression. Every archetype you've encountered, the shadow, the inner child, the hero, the anima, the persona, becomes a guide on this path. Each one holds a key to a part of yourself. To individuate is to reclaim those keys, to unlock the rooms of your inner world that have been closed for too long. There's a beautiful paradox in individuation. As you become more uniquely yourself, you become more connected to the universal. The deeper you go into your own psyche, the more you touch what is eternal in the human condition. This is why mythology, dreams, and archetypes feel so alive. They are not just stories from the past, but blueprints of your own becoming. Individuation is not about ego inflation. It's not "I am special," it's "I am whole." It's about embodying both light and shadow, masculine and feminine, vulnerability and power. It's about holding the tension of opposites within you without breaking, and realizing that your wholeness includes all that you've been taught to reject. This is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In the modern world, individuation is radical because everything around you tries to distract you from it. Social media tells you to become a brand, work tells you to become a function, society tells you to fit in, perform, and avoid discomfort. But your soul tells you to remember, to go inward, to walk the ancient and sacred path that has no clear map, only inner signals, dreams, intuitions, and symbols that guide the way. Individuation is not about arriving. It's about continuously evolving, becoming, deepening. It's not a race, it's a rhythm, a return. And the more you walk this path, the more alive you become. Not in a loud, performative way, but in the quiet, rooted, powerful way of someone who knows who they are, someone who's been to the depths and returned, not empty, but whole. The journey to reconnect with your soul is the most important one you will ever undertake, and yet for so many, it feels like an impossible task. In the relentless grind of daily life, many of us lose touch with that quiet inner voice, the spark of life that lies deep within us. We mistake distractions for fulfillment, achievements, for meaning and social approval, for validation of our worth. Reconnection with the soul isn't just a nice idea, it's a desperate need for survival. Without it, we risk living lives of quiet desperation, where we may achieve everything we've been taught to value, but feel nothing. The first step toward reclaiming your soul is acknowledging that this disconnection exists and embracing the reality that there is more to life than what you've been conditioned to believe. So how do you begin? It starts by creating space for silence. The soul speaks in whispers, and you cannot hear those whispers if you're constantly surrounded by noise. Take time to be alone, to sit in stillness, to allow the deeper parts of you to surface. This may be uncomfortable at first, because the soul doesn't speak in the language of the mind. It speaks in symbols, in emotions, in dreams. You might find yourself resisting. You might feel the pull of anxiety or restlessness, but this is part of the process. To reconnect with your soul, you must be willing to face the discomfort, the unknown, and allow it to lead you back to yourself. Silence is not a void, it's a space for discovery. Another powerful tool in reconnecting with your soul is shadow work. This involves facing those parts of yourself that you've buried, ignored, or rejected because they were too painful, too dark, or too inconvenient. The soul does not thrive in denial. The more you repress these parts, the more they control you from the shadows, distorting your actions and relationships. By embracing your shadow, by accepting all the parts of you that you've been taught to hide or deny, you begin to heal the split between your conscious and unconscious self. The act of reconciliation with your shadow is a profound step toward soul reconnection. It is an act of self-love and courage because it requires you to fully accept your humanity, the light and the dark, the beautiful and the broken. Finally, reconnecting with your soul requires you to live authentically, no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer hiding behind a persona, no longer chasing approval. Your soul knows the truth about you, and when you begin to live in alignment with that truth, you start to feel alive in ways you never thought possible. The mask you've worn starts to fall away, revealing the deeper, richer, more vibrant version of yourself. This journey may be long and challenging, but it is also incredibly rewarding. It is about rediscovering your purpose, your passion, your essence. The soul has always been with you, patiently waiting to be seen. And once you finally listen, it will guide you home, back to your truest, most powerful self. As we come to the end of this journey through the disconnection and reconnection with our soul, remember that the process is not something that can be accomplished overnight. Reconnecting with your soul is a lifelong journey, one that demands patience, courage, and a willingness to face the parts of you that have been buried in darkness. Our society tells us to chase success, to fit into neat boxes, and to suppress what doesn't align with the image of the ideal person. But the true essence of who you are exists beyond these constraints. It is within you, waiting for the moment you choose to stop running, to stop numbing, and to listen to the quiet whispers of your soul. The road to your soul might be painful at times, but it is also the road to freedom, peace, and authentic joy. Embrace the discomfort, face your shadows, honor the voice that has been quieted for too long, because when you reconnect with your soul, you reconnect with your true power, your real purpose, and the deep well of peace that lies within.